Hi, my name is Connie Garrison, and I started with Cherokee County School District in 1996, and I started out as a parapro. And a little funny sidebar, I was PTA president, and I was at school there with my boys at Buffington, which is no longer in service with the district. And a great lady said, why don't I just pay you to be up at the school all the time? So I ended up becoming a parapro. Also at the time it was Title I, now it's EIP and REP, which was a great precursor for how I ended up teaching.
I started with CCSD in 1984 as a language arts teacher at Holly Springs Elementary School. I was there for 2 years. I transferred to Dean Rusk Middle School when all the middle schoolers, or 7th and 8th graders, went to middle school, and I worked at Dean Rusk for 3 years.
I began my CCSD career in the school year of 1998-99. We had moved here as a family from Michigan, where I had about 10 years of teaching experience, actually Michigan and Chicago, so the Midwest. So this was a brand new pathway for our family. I began my career at E.T. Booth Middle School. I was hired as an 8th grade English language arts and reading educator.
I retired in 2024 from Creekland Middle School, and I had taught math for over 20 years, and Dr. Carnes came to me and asked me if I wanted to teach STEM, which was a lot of funsy things. It was science and math, and we did a little bit of writing, and it was new. The county was coming into getting their STEM certification, so it was an exciting time, but also kind of like we were testing the water. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. It was a great way to end my teaching career on a great note.
I retired in 2020 in the middle of COVID as a school social worker for Cherokee County School District.
I retired from CCSD in June of 2017, which means this is my 8th year into retirement, which is crazy. At the time, I actually retired as the assistant superintendent of what we then called educational programs, student support, and professional development.
Well, I think it pursued me. Like I said, I didn't realize that, and I tell the kids all the time when I was in the classroom, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so teaching found me, and it kept drawing me closer and closer. And there was a gentleman that came in to Buffington Elementary School, and he worked at the state through PAGE, a teacher's program. And so he asked me, he said, what do you do here? And I said, well, I'm a parapro. I teach Title I math. And he said, oh, you're not a teacher here? And I said, not yet. I'm just kind of testing the waters. And he said, well, I need for you to write me an essay, and I want to submit that to see about getting you some scholarship money for teaching it. I mean, we hadn't even talked about this. The story just kind of ran itself. And so, which, Janice Prather, she might have had a little bit of part in that, but I think she was letting me see if this is what I liked, or because I just love children, because children are just curious. And I'm kind of like that as an adult. I will try something to see, how it goes, or maybe we need to go a different direction. But once I got started, I loved the kids, and I was just drawn to them. And I started at 3rd grade, and then another lady, she said, I'll do K3 if you'll do 4th, 5th, and 6th, because 6 was in elementary, and I loved it. So I loved that middle age, that whole kind of vibe, and so I just went from there. It just kind of, then the county office, I think, teamed up with Reinhardt, and they started their first cohort program with the education field at Reinhardt. At that time, Reinhardt was a university. It was actually Reinhardt College. Now they've transferred into the university system. But it was just I think it just found me. Teaching found me, and I had been, Sunday school teacher and things of that nature, Bible school, just helping kids, doing some volunteer work with kids. And I think teaching just found me. And I'll see kids out and I'll be over there playing with the children, and the adults are like, come here. And I was like, well, we were just playing. I'll be there in 5 minutes. So I think it just naturally found me. So, and I've enjoyed it so much. And I do miss it. I miss the kids. But I have enjoyed being retired.
Well, I had a teacher that made a big impact in my life, and that's the main reason. Neither of my parents finished high school, and I thought I'd be doing good if I just finished high school, went to work, and I had a teacher that saw more in me than I saw in myself, I guess. Miss Dorothy Street was that teacher at Cherokee High School in the early 70s, and I was not on the college track or anything like that during my first couple of years at Cherokee. She encouraged me to do that I needed to challenge myself and take some college preparatory courses, which I did. She also encouraged me to join the school newspaper staff, and she was the sponsor of that staff, so I did that. And later that year, she took us on a field trip to the University of Georgia at the Henry W. Grady School of Communications, and I walked around that big campus and thought, I'll never be able to be at a place like this. But it lit a spark in me, and later, after a 2-year stint at Reinhardt, I did end up at the University of Georgia and became the first person in my family to get a college degree. Wasn't the last, but I was the first.
I chose to pursue education based on a feeling, actually, that I had being in a classroom. To me, being in the classroom was just being home. And it started as far back as I can remember in elementary school. And it was an ongoing yearning to be in that culture. And particularly, not a single moment, but an experience I had with a teacher who happened to be a teacher in 5th and 6th grade as we looped up. And she started a practice of reading aloud to us. Every day after lunch, she would read aloud. And there was that particular experience, looking forward to being in that environment. Her name was Miss Smith. Still my all-time favorite teacher, but I remember thinking, I want to do for students and for children what she's doing for me. I became enamored with her influence. I became enamored with the relationship, with the feeling, with the climate, and also just the power of books, and became a lifelong reader because of her influence, and never really looked back that that's something I wanted to do for others.
My first year as a true teacher, not that I wasn't, because my experiences through Parapro were just great, but my first year of full-time teaching was during 9/11. So during that time frame, my first full teaching in the classroom, that happened, Mr. Norton, which was my college sponsor at the time, he was out with me, and then I had another teacher with me. But what I truly remember is that children are naturally compassionate. So at that whole time frame, the kids, they started, well, of course that day we didn't talk anything about that, but the next day we talked about, what we could do to help others. And so the kids wanted to raise money. We were at Hickory Flat, and the kids were they got together and they wanted to help, what could they do to help the country out or to help, victims. So it just went from there. That's what I remember the most of my first year of full-time teaching. And then, of course, as we gradually got back into the swing of regular everyday life, I just thought the kids are so compassionate. We just learned so much from kids. But my first year of teaching was amazing. I didn't even know I was going to teach math. I remember a high school teacher, Miss Morris. She was a great teacher, and she would always say, just justify your answer, because sometimes the answer would come up in my head in a different way. And I try to tell kids that when I was teaching math, like, just tell me how you got the answer. It doesn't have to be Miss Garrison's way. It can be another way, as long as we get to the answer. And one of the crazy things, and the kids said, you always say the craziest things. I would say, I don't care how you get to Canton, just get to Canton with Miss Garrison. I said, you can go to Woodstock and come to Canton. You can go up 575 and come to Canton, as long as you get to Canton. So I kind of stuck with that. Let's just get to Canton together. So most of the time we made it. Sometimes we had to backtrack and turn around, but that's okay. That's just a big part of teaching.
Well, I remember I was no Dorothy Street, that's for sure. It was my first year. I kind of felt like I did when I was 14 years old and started my first part-time job at Hickory Flat store out in the Hickory Flat community where the Chick-fil-A is now. I'm sure I wasn't much good to the owners at that time, but they were willing to give me a job and teach me some skills, people skills and job skills like learning to count money and things like that. And so I kind of felt the same way my first year of teaching. I knew my subject matter, it wasn't that, but it's just, when you're teaching 180 something different personalities and you have to find ways to motivate all of them and get them where they need to go, sometimes that's a learning process. And so I felt like I was, still learning by a long shot at that point. But what it did teach me was that I really had a heart for the at-risk population. I loved those students that struggled and really had a hard time. And those were the ones I loved working with the most. So when I got an opportunity 5 years later to move in the Student Services Department and work with those students, I jumped at the chance. And so that's how I ended up in school social work. The first social worker that I worked with was Mr. Jim Brookshire. He was the social worker at the time, and they brought me on to just work strictly with students with attendance issues, because at that time the central office was very lean and you had 3 or 4 jobs as soon as you walked in the door there. But Superintendent Klein said, I want someone just to work on attendance, and so that was me. Mr. Brookshire encouraged me to go back and get my degree in social work and my certification for the state of Georgia, which I did. And so for the next 31 years, I was the social worker, after I got my degree, of course, for Cherokee County.
What do I remember about my first year of teaching? It was kind of a sign of the times. It was the late 70s, and I was hired in a middle school, which was very unique because all of my student teaching and all my connection was to the elementary level. So I was hired as a middle school language arts teacher. I remember 3 things that stand out. One is in the interview, it was a very small district in suburban Chicago, and the superintendent and the principal of the school were present. And at the very end, he said, I'm going to ask you to spell 3 words. And I thought, I'm going to freeze. I have to spell, I guess, to be a great English teacher. And I can't remember all 3 words, but I remember the final word was Mississippi. And I felt so confident. I could spell Mississippi. That just stands out to me as a uniqueness of an interview for that position. But we were in an open classroom model school where the walls did not go all the way up to the ceiling. It was the concept of moving partitioned walls, and that was very challenging for me. I had 6th graders all day long, and 6th graders hearing noise from other classrooms was completely challenging. However, on the other side of that, I remember that there was a benefit to understanding teaming. We could move rooms, flexibility, creativity. So that ended up being a positive, but it was very, very challenging at the time. I think I still prefer classrooms with walls that go up to the ceiling. I'll just say that. But the other thing I remember is curriculum. I was handed a textbook. I was handed a 6th grade language arts textbook and a teacher guide, and that was it. Do not remember, nor did I work under curriculum standards for the state of Illinois. We did not work as a team in planning like we do now. It was a solo act with that curriculum guide, the only curriculum guide being a teacher guide and that classroom textbook.
My favorite memory, I would say it's been a couple of years, and I had lots of funny things happen as you're teaching in the classroom. You never know what's going to happen, so always be prepared. But I had a 6th grade class, I think it was 2016, and they were very, they liked things that kind of spontaneous. And so I would try to do lots of centers, lots of math centers, and just kind of keep them occupied. And so we talked about like things were happening on a roller coaster, and we would go through math assignments. So when they graduated, which I was very flattered, me and another teacher, they asked us in the sixth grade, they asked us to take them to Six Flags. And so, of course, we asked their parents, and when the parents went, and we rode all the roller coasters, and we did all the funsy things. We talked about some school things, but school was over at that time. So we just said, we're just going to have a good time. So when they graduated, they got in touch with us and asked us if we would take them back to Six Flags. So, and of course, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm quite a bit older and I'm going to ride a roller coaster. And my other colleague that went with us, she was quite a bit younger, and she texted me afterwards. And of course, my face was red, I was sweating, but I was right in there with the kids, and they were having the best time. They're like, oh my gosh, this is the best time. And she texted me afterwards, and she said, are you okay? You were a trooper. You hung in there and you rode every roller coaster. And I said, I am so determined to hang in there and stay with the kids. But it's just little things like that. You know, teaching academics is great, but also letting kids know that you can just be a normal person, and you are excited to be in the midst of what is going on in their life. And the fact that they ask after they graduate, I mean, they could have been on graduation trips, and there they were at Six Flags with two of their teachers. So that's one of the things that really sticks out in my mind.
Gosh, I have so many, it's going to be hard to narrow them down. I could talk for days about my favorite memory, but I'll focus on two programs that I started for Cherokee County that caused a lot of good memories for me. The first one was the Cherokee County Truancy Panel, which I believe is still ongoing to this day. So that's something that kind of outlasted me, which I'm proud of. But we went to Judge Jackson Harris at the time and asked him about the possibility of starting an interagency collaboration with all the different agencies in the community to battle truancy. And he was on board with that, and he encouraged us to go ahead with it. So then we went to all the different agencies, DFACS, public health, mental health, got them on board. And we were not the first county in the state to do truancy panels, but we were one of the early ones. And so later the state would mandate those panels, but we could proudly say at Cherokee that we'd been doing them for years when that happened. But we did have a county that came and trained us. Douglas County school social workers came and put on a training for us as to how they ran their panels. And the memory from that is just the outpouring from the community and the support that we got at that time. We had everybody from all the agencies, DFACS, mental health, public health, the central office here at the school district. We had counselors there, principals there, interested in learning about how this panel was going to work. And so within a few weeks of having that training, we started our panel and started running them pretty regularly from then on. There was some magic sometimes in those panels because we were kind of precipitating a crisis in those families' lives by telling them this is the last step before this ends up in court. And so a lot of times they would come in and we would try to make sure that the panel was structured so that we were there to help. We're here to help you. If you'll tell us what's going on in your family, we're going to do everything we can to help and keep this from escalating on. And so a lot of times those families, I guess, would feel the pressure of that, and they would just spill out things. And sometimes none of the agencies had even heard these stories or knew what was going on. And we would always go around and ask every agency before the family came in, had you worked with this family in any capacity? And so we could get an idea of the problems that were going on and things like that. But sometimes nobody had any idea. And when they would come in and tell their story, our jaws would just drop. But everybody would just jump in, and DFACS would say, we'll do this for you, and mental health, we'll do this for you. The school system says, we'll get PTA involved, and we'll get some resources for you. It was just amazing to see the outpouring of the community. DFACS gets a bad rap. They are often criticized, but I never had anything but positive interactions with them. They always wanted to help, do whatever they could to help students. They're overworked, understaffed, and they're kind of the last step. So they've got a tough job. But all those agencies jumped in. They never missed a meeting. If they couldn't come themselves, the person that was designated, they would send a replacement. Same thing with the school system. They would send a counselor or assistant principal or somebody every time to support the school when they were asked to. And it was just, a wonderful feeling to feel that the community was that invested in the program. And then some of our schools, it was a limited number of families that we could see every year. Some of the schools started their own in-house panels, and we're doing them on the school campuses to try to, prevent it from escalating to our panel. So it was just, to me, that was a joy to see that the way that the community supported us in that effort. So that was one of my big memories. And the other one was when we started the SUPER program, which stands for Substance Use Prevention and Education Resource. At the time, we didn't have a crossroads, and so students were getting put out of school for drug and alcohol offenses, and sometimes they were out for a long period of time. So we came up with the idea, if we can use a program so where parents and students will come to this and get some education about drug and alcohol use, then we could shave some time off of their suspension. So we went to the superintendent, and they said, let's go with it. And we got the program from a place called the Council of Alcohol and Drugs in Atlanta, which is a nonprofit agency. I think they get funding from federal grants and state money too. And they devised these programs, and they would make modules, and you could choose from them, depending on what your community needed. So we did that, and again, being the only social worker at the time, I had to, have a lot of help and come up with creative ways to serve. So I had to get our counselors involved to help me run that program. And again, they just jumped on board and said, yes, we'll do it. Had more volunteers than I could even use at the time. And we went to Atlanta for a training on how to, do this program. And so we did that, and we started providing that for students who got in trouble at school. Later on, that wasn't such a big issue when we had crossroads, but then we would say, okay, if you want to go back to your regular school, if you'll take this program, this SUPER program, you can go back to your regular school once you've completed that. Again, it was, and that turned into another job for me, because one time the head of the program, Dr. Greg Raduca, who just happened to live in Woodstock, he was bringing some materials one night to me. He said, where can I meet you? I've got some new materials for you. And I said, well, I've got a program tonight at Woodstock High where the night school was. I said, if you can meet me there, I'll take the stuff there. So he did, and he saw me present to the parents that night. And he said, the juvenile court in Cherokee County is wanting to start a SUPER program, and I want you to run it. And so I ended up for a while doing SUPER with the school district and with the juvenile court for a while. Again, that time it was with the DJJ workers who helped me facilitate that program. So it just turned into, again, the community and the folks, when I asked them to help. And we've got some great counselors in this county, by the way, and I'm sure we did when I worked, and I'm sure we still do. They never turned me down. They always said yes if I asked anything of them, like showing up for panels and SUPER. And so, I just, again, that was just, it made me feel great to know that they were willing to do that. And it was always cool to see these parents. They would come in with like this and thinking, my kid got in trouble, and I'm going to have to be punished for it by having to show up to this program. So I would always try to, welcome them and say, thank you for caring enough about your kid to be here for them. There are parents that will say, I'm not doing that. My kid can just suffer the consequences. And I said, you cared enough about your kid to be here, and we thank you for that. And you can just kind of see the shoulders relax a little bit. And then by the time the program was over, a lot of times they would come up to me at the end and say, every parent and student ought to go through a program like this. I don't care if they've been in trouble or not. They thought they were going to get nothing, but drugs are bad, and this is what's going to happen. There's going to be these consequences. But really what we gave them was a lot of communication skills, how to communicate with your parents better, how do parents communicate with your children better, how you can communicate better with your peers at school and with your teachers, and even how to communicate with peers when you're feeling peer pressure and they're wanting you to do something you don't really want to do. If you've got strong communication skills, you can talk your way out of that. And so that was mainly what they got, instead of just a lecture on drugs and alcohol, was a mini parenting course and a course on communication skills for the students. So again, the way the families would change from the start of the program to the end of the program was just something I'll never forget.
So trying to recall one single favorite memory is very, very challenging for a retired educator. So I will base this on the foundational memories that were consistent as I taught middle school over the years. And that would be the experience of the read aloud, which I earlier mentioned influenced me as a very young child. But I brought the read aloud into my classroom, into my reading classroom. It was an extremely significant part of eighth graders' learning. And there was one particular, their experience to be interactive with novels was personal, pivotal, and sometimes it changed their minds on what young adult literature could do for them. But one particular memory over the years of using a read aloud was when I selected from the book fair a recently honored book for informational text. And the title of the book was actually called Surviving Hitler. It was written by a man who was in his 70s, but he was recalling in a memoir what it was like to be a teenager, actually the same exact age as my eighth graders, in a concentration camp. Very, very difficult content, but it was so beautifully written, and the students were so curious and so impacted by his writing that they wanted to reach out to him. Now, this is before we could do Teams calls. This is before we had the computer technology to be able to do that fluidly. So they asked me to try to contact him. I did so through the publisher and never heard back. Those students returned after Christmas vacation, and their first question was, did you get a hold of Jack Mandelbaum, who is the man for which I'm speaking? I had not. They asked me to go a different route. So this time I wrote to the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, for which Jack was actually in charge of. And they forwarded that email to him. The book was brand new. He received the email. He contacted me personally and said, I write because I want to inform students. And your note to me about how this has influenced your students, I'd like to come meet them. So Jack Mandelbaum flew across the country from St. Louis on his own time and on his own dime, and came up to spend a whole day, not only just with our eighth graders on our team, but we invited all the eighth graders and their parents and filled the auditorium at Etowah High School. And he stood up there and and as the saying goes, you could have heard a pin drop. So afterwards, he came back, he met with students, he met with parents, he signed books. But the reason this memory is so vivid to me was the full circle moment of wanting and yearning the students to understand the power of literature. And it was their passion, it was their drive not to give up and to find him, and for him to have the heart to come back. And he said to these students, I'll never forget, I am here because once I am gone, my story may not live on. They can tell it a different way. I want you to know this is my story. It's a tender topic, it could be a controversial topic, but I will never forget how the students made that all happen out of their passion for literature.
I would say I just be true to yourself. Like I said at the beginning, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I worked in corporate, and it was fine. I drove downtown, and it was a great job. I enjoyed it, but I always felt like, something, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? And at times it's okay not to know. And then I had children, a stay-at-home mom, and then things just started gradually happening. So sometimes you have to be true to yourself and just go with what you know, and sometimes things fall into place. Maybe you're not the best at something, and we talked about this a lot, but I would always say, just give me your 110%. And they're like, can you have over 100%? And I was like, yes, who is your math teacher? We have talked about this before. We've talked about percentages, but just be true to yourself and just go. When I started teaching STEM, the natural curiosity, and I was nervous about teaching STEM because I'd never taught science before. And I told the kids, and I tried to be so honest with them that, science is not my gig, but look at what we're doing. We were having a burn lab, and we were burning with fire. Of course, the firemen were there. They were helping us with all this. But just go with your gut, and yes, you have to have a plan, but sometimes that plan changes, and that's okay.
Well, I hope I can help them to develop a mindset of growth instead of, being. I would run across students all the time. I'm not good at writing. I'm not good at language arts. I stink at math. And later on as a school social worker, they would say, I'm not smart. I can't do this. I don't like school. And so I would always try to encourage them, you're doing a self-fulfilling prophecy if you've got that attitude, because if you say I'm going to fail, that's what's going to happen. But if you can learn that, if I put my effort in and I try and I work at it, then I can always get better. And to say that you're not smart, everybody has gifts. We all have different gifts, and you can use your gifts to compensate for your weaknesses. So I would always try to tell students, I said, if you want to develop a growth mindset, listen to the Miley Cyrus song, The Climb. There's always going to be another mountain. I'm going to want to make it move. I know it's going to be an uphill battle, and sometimes I'm going to have to lose. Doesn't matter how fast I get there. It doesn't matter what's waiting on the other side. It's the climb. If you could instill that in students or families for that matter, there's no stopping them. It's how far they can go. And so I hope that I could instill that in some of my students.
The influence that I dearly hope that I had on any student that was in my classroom would be the power and the influence of words. I had the privilege of teaching students as they were writing, and teaching students as they were reading, and just that whole full circle language arts. The power of the written word, the power of reading the written word, the power of speaking words. We always started out the year with an activity where they were asked to pick one particular word that they would deem their favorite word. They had to choose it, illustrate it, and the whole back wall of the classroom were all these words. And it really helped them cross over to that words can be deeply personal, deeply emotive, and that was just something that I wanted them to carry away into all of their learning, is the influence and the power of the written, spoken, and obviously written by others through reading. So that's what I would hope that they would learn, and also just the interaction with all of that they would feel they could take risks in their writing, they could take risks in their reading, and that would help them grow through learning, not just academically, but just how the world works and just about themselves as individuals.
I think that my first year teaching, I felt like I did know a little bit with life experiences, but sometimes it can be what you expect and sometimes it's not what you expect. But it's how you land on your feet when you're not expecting something. Always have a plan B. That's good. And always your best resource are your colleagues. Starting out teaching a little bit later, I wasn't sure how things worked within the realm of school. And I always felt like I could go ask someone on my team, which they would say, ask us. And of course I was like, I don't know. I don't want to ask a question that, someone's already said. And of course I had great principals. They were, come to me if you have any questions. So use all your resources. They're there. The county office was always a great resource. I mean, there were people in the county office when I didn't know things about technology, and it was just tiny technology was coming in. And I would, of course I would email, or I would ask my principal, but I would email people like Jackie Hopkins or Esther Ritteman. One of the funniest stories is this is dating, a Web 2.0 with Sandy Adams. And she went through all this stuff and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to use this. But we did. 15, 20 years later, here we are with Twitter, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is what I said. The only Twitter I knew was Conway Twitty, which is not even close to anything about, Twitter. But she was so good about teaching that. So just go try new things. I was like, okay, we'll try it. In the words of Jim Barry, he's like, you can't break it. If you delete it, we can always find it. It's somewhere. I'll never forget, my computer died. I mean, it went black, the screen fell down, and of course I'm trying to hold it together during class, and I was like, okay, get out your workbook, we'll do this. And then after the kids left, school was over, I was like crying, thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? All of my math stuff is gone. So my principal said, hey, we'll call somebody in technology, they'll find it. And they did. So, things seem sometimes gloom and doom, but there's always a silver lining. So, but just remember that. And I tried to tell the kids, when something doesn't go the way you think it should, tomorrow's a new day. So things I told the kids, I had to go back home and self-reflect, like, okay, is that what I present in the classroom? Because if it's not, how can I tell kids this and not go through that, go through that same thought process myself? So just be yourself. You'll have a great time. It is tiring, but teaching is a calling, and you'll get to the point where you'll say, oh, this is what this is about. And then you'll try something new, and then you'll start all over again.
I would just say be authentic and be yourself. Give yourself some grace when you mess up, because it's just like you give your students grace when they are not at their best. And just know that if you lay your head on your pillow every night and you've done everything you can for your students and you've worked hard to get them where they need to go, and they know that you care about them and care, that you're there for them, then I think you'll have a great career. And so that would be my advice, is just to, do that every day. And when you're dealing with 180 something different personalities, you're not going to always get it right. It's kind of like being a parent, it's a learning process. And so, but you've got 180 instead of 2 or 3 at home. So, it takes some time, but if you stick with it and that's your goal, that you want to, model the behaviors that you want them to have, and you show them you care about them, then you're going to go a long way.
What advice would I give to a first-year teacher today? Obviously, starting my career about 45 years ago might be different than what I would ask or give advice to a teacher today in the contemporary classroom. But I think this question could be answered by, it depends on the individual setting of the teacher, the type of school they're in, what they're facing, how they were educated. But some of the advice is foundational. I would want all first-year teachers to know the flooding, the overwhelming is normal. To normalize that coming out of a formal education and then going into a teaching setting, your classroom may be decorated perfectly, you may feel like you've got this, you're ready, your lesson's ready, but it is still very overwhelming. And you can be flooded cognitively, emotionally, personally, professionally, physically. Just to normalize that and understand you belong in a very special transition period. But I think the most significant advice I would give to a teacher, whether it was when I started or now as a first year, is when you go into a classroom, you wear heavily that role and proudly that hat and that role of being a teacher, what you're going to bestow on your students. But I believe the most effective teachers and educators are those that see themselves as actually the most significant learner in the classroom. To go in understanding that what you ask of your students is what you should ask of yourself every day. The cycle of teaching and learning. We ask students to take risks. We ask students to have a growth mindset. That's a great concept. Do we give it to ourselves? Do we go in understanding that as we grow, as we pull from them, as we learn from them, and we get into the cycle of learning, reflecting, analyzing, assessing, resetting, that's something we ask of our students every day through data, through conversations, through relationships. And I believe the most effective educators see themselves as the most pivotal learner in the classroom. That's not to dismiss the students. And as such, to understand that's an ongoing journey in the short term, midterm, and then obviously in the long term as well.